Welcome to the Sloth Investor Podcast with your host, Mr. Sloth.
The information on this podcast is provided for education and informational purposes only. The information contained in or provided from or through this podcast is not intended to be and does not constitute advice of any kind. Welcome everyone to episode 22 of the Sloth Investor Podcast, an investing podcast that explores why I believe the humble sloth is the best animal to characterize successful investing. Once again, I'm joined by my fellow stock investor and co-host Jay. Jay, how are you?
I'm doing absolutely fantastic. The sun is out after a prolonged period of rain and clouds here in Hong Kong, and I couldn't be happier right now because the last 2 days I've been trying to get some vitamin D and enjoy the sunshine, absorb the energy from it.
Couldn't agree more. So much precipitation. It's time to absorb the vitamin D. And Jay, things have changed in recent weeks for me. You know, my family, we're taking a plunge. Tomorrow, we are going to be fostering a dog for 5 weeks. And Jay, I know you're a dog owner. Jay, do you have any advice, any top tips for me?
Yeah, my top tip is prepare yourself mentally that you say you're fostering it, but you're probably going to be keeping it.
I know. I can see my kids seeking to persuade me. It's a cute dog. It's going to be 5 weeks, but it could turn into a longer period of time. So we'll have to see. I think Mrs. Sloth may have some words for me if there's any plans to kind of adopt to adopt the dog, but it's a cutie. So,
is it a puppy? Is it going to be a puppy?
It's a puppy. It's a puppy. So I'll keep you guys posted and I'll let you know, but we're certainly looking forward to it. We really are. Definitely.
I'm looking forward to hearing how this journey goes for you.
So Jay, it's episode 22, and I think it's about time we took a peek again into the Sloth Investors Dictionary. Now, the last time we delved inside this investment-themed book, which was during episode 19, of course, we discussed the letters A to D. Today, we'll explore words that belong in the Sloth Investor Dictionary that begin with the letters E to I. Jay, are you ready?
Buckle up because I am ready for more.
Fantastic, Jay. Fantastic. That's what I like to hear. Okay, so let's begin with something that's very important to both of us. I just mentioned my children a moment ago. You've got kids as well, Jay.
I do.
Quite simply, it's one of the key reasons why we formed this podcast. It is, of course, education. Okay, so Jay and I hope that in the first 21 episodes of this podcast, we've been able to educate listeners about how to invest like a sloth. Now, a subject area that we haven't ever really touched upon is education for the really young ones. So by this, I mean children in perhaps, let's say the 5 to 11 age range. So to kick off today's podcast, I'm going to touch upon several financially themed books that I've bought for my own children. Before I do so though, Jay, what do you think? How important is it that we educate our children about financial literacy from a young age?
Yeah, you know, I've mentioned this in previous podcasts, and if this is your first time listening to our podcast, it's so important to me. The idea of financial literacy and being taught to my own children is something that really resonates with me because I didn't learn financial literacy until I was in my late 30s.
Wow.
And yeah, maybe I would say late 30s and my 40s, and that was a big regret of mine. I wish somebody had been around to teach me some of the simple yet fundamental aspects of investing. So I've really started with my own children really early. My son Jacob in particular, you know, I think around 10 or 11 years old, he's really connected with it, and he takes a real shine to it, and he really likes it. And I'm happy because he's learning some valuable life lessons at a very early age.
Fantastic to hear. That's fantastic indeed. Okay, so Jay, we'll begin with a book entitled Grandpa's Fortune Fables, and it's written by Will Rainey, who is a fellow Brit. So this book contains 14 short stories that teach valuable lessons about how to grow wealth. In my opinion, the author has a real flair for using analogies to teach important financial concepts. And if you guys, regular listeners will know, if you guys know me, Mr. Sloth, you know that I love using analogies myself. So this is why this particular book really resonated with me.
You use analogies? I haven't heard you use any.
Yeah. You know, just time to time, what can I say? You know, time to time. Yeah. So, you know, here are some of the chapter titles in Grandpa's Fortune Fables. Okay, so chapter 4 is Happy Farmer, Sad Farmer, and that chapter is focused on working smart. Chapter 6 is entitled The Trip to the Village, and that chapter is centered upon the importance of saving before spending. Chapter 8 is entitled Richie Raccoon's Red Tree, and that chapter is focused upon debt and gambling. However, listeners, Jay, my favorite chapter has to be chapter 11, which is entitled Mr. Lazy's Trees. And this chapter focuses upon strategy, okay? A focus upon strategy. So let me read an extract, and listeners will soon see why I'm fond of this chapter. First of all, though, let me preface this citation by informing listeners that throughout the book, the author uses a forest as an analogy for growing one's wealth. Okay, here's the citation. Begin quote. As they walked to find other big trees, Richie said, "We aren't having much luck at all. No one we've spoken to has provided us with any secrets to growing large trees. Essentially, they've all done absolutely nothing." "That's it," exclaimed Grandpa. "The secret to growing the biggest trees is to do nothing. We've been looking for actions to take, but those who did nothing and left their trees alone now have the biggest trees. They do nothing, no matter if a storm is coming or not. That's what we should do with our trees. Absolutely nothing." End quote. Taking little action to grow one's wealth. Does that ring any bells, Jay? Can you perhaps understand why I'm fond of chapter 11? Also, what do you think about the use of a forest to teach children about increasing personal wealth?
Well, first of all, I love the analogy of the forest, but the audience has to know this is about take 18 because Mr. Sloth was doing his very best Jimmy Stewart impression voiceover for that quote. It was impressive. You have to say, I've got to give you my...
Jay,
yeah, that was great. That was awesome.
I couldn't resist. As someone who grew up watching Hitchcock movies every now and again, Rear Window, Vertigo, The Man Who Knew Too Much, I'm a big fan of Jimmy Stewart. Well, an American acting icon. It's a Wonderful Life.
Yes.
And I just had to use my Jimmy Stewart voice for that quote.
Why are you wanting money out of the bank, see?
It's a prerequisite for any grandpa impression, in my opinion. It really is. I'm a big Jimmy Stewart fan. What can I say? But yeah, great analogy, right?
I loved it. Yeah, you know what my hope is for my own children is that they learn valuable lessons at a really early age. So that, and probably the biggest one with my son Jacob right now is the market swings.
Yeah,
we're going through a massive correction, but previously over the years, over the last 10, 15, 20 years, in a big massive market correction, I lost my nerve and would sell. Much to my chagrin and much my regret.
Yep.
For him, it doesn't faze him. He's just so used to it now, and that he understands that's a natural course, that he's not looking at the next 4 months, 6 months, 12 months. He's looking at 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And so to me, these are very valuable lessons that I wish I had learned early on.
I love hearing that, and I was about to say he's a sloth investor in the making, but the way he's responding to the current market volatility, he's already a sloth investor. And that's what I love about, what I'm hearing about your son, what I'm hearing about Jacob. That's fantastic. That is music to my ears. I absolutely love hearing it. I really do. So listeners, I thoroughly recommend Grandpa's Fortune Fables. Each story is roughly around 12 to 15 pages long. And by the end of your book, your children will have learned a bucket load about financial literacy. So perhaps put Harry Potter aside for a couple of weeks and give your child a chance to check out Grandpa's Fortune Fables. Excuse me. Okay, so let me make a slight change of direction now by discussing a book that's aimed at a slightly younger audience, okay? So if Grandpa's Fortune Fables is suitable for perhaps 8 to 12-year-olds, I would put the suggested age range for the next book at around 3 to 8 years old, okay? And the book is called M is for Money. M is for Money, and it's by Rob Phelan. So this book is great as it provides an A to C of financial literacy terms for younger kids, sort of like a Sloth Investor dictionary, but for the very youngest members of your family. So, for example, in the book, for the letter E, the word is earn, and the author states that this means doing something that makes you money. The letter I is, of course, for invest, and the author states that invest means when we use our time or money now to get something better. Jay, I love the graphics in this book, and I love the simplicity of the design. The author should be proud of this book. Jay, what are your thoughts on this dictionary-style financial literacy book for younger kids? A good idea?
I have the full disclosure. I hadn't heard of these books until I was reading the notes on our podcast. But when I was looking at them and looking at the books, I couldn't help but think, when I was a kid, there was a book series by Richard Scarry, and some of the titles were things like the best world ever and what people do all day, and those were my bedtime books. I would open them and just look at seeing, what does a dentist do? What does a doctor do? What does a fireman do? And this is, to me, the same thing, but the world of investing. It draws you in with the graphics and the simple text. It was great. I loved it.
Yeah. And I think, Jay, unless I'm mistaken, when I was perusing the website of the author, Rob Phelan, I do remember him stating that he was actually reading a book to his child that had that kind of A to Z theme. I think it may have been about animals, for example, perhaps, or habitats. And it kind of inspired him to create, an A to Z book about financial literacy. So it just takes, one catalyst, and from there we get a great idea. So full marks to Rob Phelan. It's a fantastic book, and it's a book that I'm looking forward to showing my children, that's for sure. So, Jay, are you ready for our final educational book for kids about finance?
And these are going to be some hard acts to follow, but hit me. I'm ready.
Yeah, I mean, 2 great books so far. And the final book is called Penny Invests, and it's by Paul Essen. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, Paul Essen. Let me read the blurb out to listeners, okay? So, when Penny is given a school assignment to write about what her parents do for a living, she suddenly realizes she doesn't know what her dad does. She remembers her mum saying that he does something in vests. But what does he do in vests? Join Penny as she discovers what her dad does and what it means to invest. Okay, so in terms of age range, I put this in between the 2 books that I've already mentioned, meaning that this book will probably be suitable for 6 to 10-year-olds. Something that I admired about the book is the use of wry humor throughout. For example, Penny hears the terms large cap and small cap, and she wonders if this means that her dad has to wear a variety of different size baseball caps at his place of work. Of course, she soon finds out the truth about the true meaning of these financial terms. Through a discussion with her mother and father, Penny soon learns the meaning of such terms as compound interest, retirement, and of course, invest. Some of the aspects of this book that I liked are the clear descriptions given for financial vocabulary, the vivid illustrations, and the author's use of wit. Finally, I also love the fact that the central character is a girl, Penny, of course. Penny's eagerness to learn more about her father's career in investing sets a fine example to other children. Jay, it's almost time to move our discussion along and to begin talking about a different theme, but any closing thoughts about educating young children about finance, or did you perhaps have any further comments about any of the books that we've mentioned? Again, these were Grandpa's Fortune Fables, Emma's for Money, and Penny Invests.
I used to think that they should be teaching financial literacy in high school, secondary school. And when I think about my own children and when I think about the books that are out there nowadays, and that the book you just mentioned, Penny Invest, I think it just came out in 2019, there's a great many resources that they should be teaching financial literacy and the basics of understanding your financial situation in elementary. And as an elementary teacher myself, I would love to see it. I could see it fitting into units like How the World Works, or I think that would be a great opportunity to help sowing the seed of understanding how your money can work for you.
Yeah. I mean, you could certainly see how a scope and sequence could be formulated for students year upon year, gradually building upon the concepts that have been covered, have been addressed in previous years. And, this year, in terms of aspects of the financial world, such as inflation, so topical, and it's so important that, even if not primary age, but certainly secondary age, students have an understanding of what inflation means, what can we do to tackle inflation, etc. So absolutely, I mean, to you and I, education is so critically important, and something that I think schools around the world can be doing more to address that, for sure.
When I was teaching year 4, before my current position, 11 years ago, I was teaching year 4, and the resources available weren't as plentiful as they are today. But I gave the students a faux $1,000 US dollars to invest. And we had a little app that we were using, and we tracked our stocks every week. And it was great because the discussions that were coming up about, what's in your portfolio? Why did you choose that one?
Yeah.
And whether or not they're accurate is not important. The discussion, but the point is they were curious. They wanted to find out more, and you're starting to stimulate that curiosity, that sense of curiosity in the children, and having those discussions, and to not be afraid. It's not overwhelming.
Yeah.
To get started, and it was interesting throughout the year. We would track the progress of their portfolio, and they would see it go up and down. But again, it's just sort of getting the idea that it's okay to go up and down, because hopefully over the long term it will go up.
Absolutely, and that's the inherent nature of the stock market, isn't it? Absolutely, that sounds fantastic. Yeah, I really, really love that indeed. Okay, so Jay, seeing as we're at the letter E, how could I not mention ETFs? We did devote an entire episode to their usefulness. That's episode 9, of course. But would you like to briefly touch upon why we're such fans of ETFs, especially low-fee, globally diversified ETFs?
Well, man, oh man, the fact that they're low fees, you can't beat it, and it's such a hedge between buying an individual company and betting on an individual company and taking the masses, these large companies, and putting them into a basket, and just for your own protection. You start early, and you're going to be very, very thankful and happy as you are later in life, whether as opposed you're betting on one company or two companies. And that's a lot of sort of eggs in one basket, but the ETF, you don't have to worry about it. If anything, ETFs have shown us over time, the course of time, over the course of 10, 20, 30 years, you're going to go up, compound interest included, or additional 8-10% a year over the long term.
And linking to what you're saying there, I don't believe I've included it as one of our words today in this E to I themed podcast. But history is key, an understanding of history. And, just yesterday, there was an article on the BBC about, Generation Z's kind of inclination and love of cryptocurrencies and NFTs. And again, I don't want to I'm not necessarily a fan of these terms such as millennials and Generation Z and so on, but they were talking about that a significant section of Generation Z is keen to invest in cryptocurrency and NFTs. And again, I'm certainly not an expert in either, but you could argue that the jury's still out on such things as NFTs and cryptocurrencies and so on. Whereas in terms of the historical evidence is abundantly clear that investing in the broadest possible sense in the stock market as a whole is a great way to invest, and the evidence is clear that investing in that way brings with it success. Broadly investing in the clearest possible sense in a globally diversified ETF or index, the evidence is abundantly clear. Okay?
I've always been curious when they say like, oh, this cryptocurrency is at the buy point. Like, are you working off like? And I admittedly, I am ignorant to it. I am ignorant on cryptocurrency. But are you working off the history of 1 year or 2 years or 3 years? You're using that as your benchmark for this is when's the best time to buy. Yeah. Whereas we have, hundreds of years for ETFs.
Sure, absolutely. The evidence is so abundantly clear in terms of market history and time, and that's one thing I would say. So to beginner investors, when you think about the audience of this podcast, and particularly we think about beginner investors, it's critically important that you understand the long-term historical success of the stock market as a whole. Cryptocurrency, NFTs, I think you and I were still kind of wary of where that is going. It's, in a sense. So certainly something to consider. So Jay, at this stage, I would like to jump to letter R, and the word is retirement. Now, before listeners become worried...
You can't jump around like that.
I know, Jay. Before listeners become worried, I'm well aware that the next letter after E is F. But the reason I'm referring to retirement is because there's a phrase beginning with the letter F that I think is perhaps more apt. Okay? And that phrase is future fund. Future fund. So why do I prefer this phrase to retirement? Well, for many, the word retirement evokes imagery of wrinkles, grey hair, perhaps even a walking stick, okay? And with the distance between one's current age and retirement age, is the continued use of the term retirement in some way detrimental? I don't know. I may be wrong on this, but in an alternative sense, I think it can be useful to frame the importance of investing around the concept of a future fund, i.e., you're investing for the future optionality of your life, for the potential existence of multiple life paths. So rather than investing for some far-off age, such as 65 or 70, traditional retirement ages for people around the world, of course. Jay, what are your thoughts about this notion of linking the importance of investing to the concept of something such as a future fund?
Well, again, it's one of those things that I never had heard. That term I had never heard until reading the notes for today's podcast. But it seemed so appropriate to me because potentially there's a negative connotation that retirement's an endpoint. And what I like the idea of it sort of changes the way the picture I have in my head when you say future fund, because it's just in the future, I could use it at any point. I could use it when I retire. I could use it well after I'm retired. And it's just funds that I'm going to have in the future, that I'm going to have access to in the futures.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about this term for optionality, and I love this use of the term optionality in terms of future fund, because you just don't know. You just don't know what is going to be down the path of your life. Could it be, a career in which you need to pay a significant amount of money for a training course? Could it be opportunities abroad? Who knows what it could be?
A medical emergency in your family.
Oh, absolutely, Jay. So many potential optionalities there in terms of what you're going to need funds for, what you could need funds for. So that concept of future fund, I think it's really important. Again, going back to education, if we're talking to younger people in particular, is the continued use of this term retirement always necessary, or could we use alternative terms such as future fund? Something to bear in mind for sure.
I like it. Yeah.
So Jay, the next step for us, I should say the next stop, is the letter G. And at this point, I want to touch upon the investing wisdom of Benjamin Graham, hence the letter G. Okay, so Benjamin Graham is someone that we've touched upon before in previous episodes, but in his book, The Intelligent Investor, heralded by Warren Buffett as the best book about investing ever written, Graham utilizes a fitting allegory that provides investors with a solid psychological framework that they should consider when thinking about the ups and downs of the stock market. So Benjamin Graham introduces us to Mr. Market, an imagined investor representing the stock market as a whole, whose investment decisions are driven by emotionality instead of sound investment sense. Mr. Market is susceptible to extreme swings of pessimism and optimism.
Mr. Market sounds a lot like me.
Oh my goodness, we've all been afflicted, right? Absolutely. So Mr. Market's emotional vulnerability, what some may today term bipolar behavior, creates wide-ranging highs and lows in stock prices. These highs and lows then compel many other investors to engage in their own form of ill-advised, irrational behavior. What effect does this behavior have? Well, the effect becomes exponential, a domino effect, characterized by an extreme bout of herd-like behavior by investors. It's set in motion, and this is what causes the extreme pendulum swings in stock prices that we have become historically accustomed to. So, the crucial lesson to be learned from Benjamin Graham's parable is that instead of succumbing and being influenced by the often volatile emotional state of Mr. Market, investors should simply turn off the noise and commit to investing over a long period of time. Benjamin Graham's formulation of Mr. Market is an appropriate lens for us to apply to stock market, as it beautifully encapsulates the reason why A, many people don't even begin investing, and B, a significant number of people perform poorly when investing.
Can I add my personal experience? So right now, at this point in time, if you're listening to this, a year after we've created it or 6 months after we created it, at this point in time right now, there's a pretty significant market sell-off.
Sure.
A pretty significant correction. And I keep reassuring myself stocks are on sale. And it seems a little bit unnerving to keep putting money in. I keep telling myself stocks are on sale. And then there was a bounce back a day or two ago, 2 days ago, a big bounce back. And I was like, oh, I should have bought more.
Yeah.
So those emotional swings are normal.
Yeah.
That trepidation when things are going on being discounted or on sale,
Yeah.
and that regret when you didn't buy more, and for not being more headstrong with your investment. But I think the principles of Sloth Investor need to still apply.
Yeah.
And that will keep you on the right path and the steady road forward.
Absolutely, Jay. And it's a book I've bought recently. I haven't read it yet, but Nick Maggiulli has just written a book, Keep on Buying. And again, of course, the central thrust of his book, no matter the stock market performance on a day-to-day basis, week-to-week basis, just keep on buying, keep on plugging away. If the market is up or down, keep on buying. Absolutely. Okay. And, in reference to point A that I spoke about a moment ago, point A being, why many people don't even begin investing. Well, it's because they're immediately concerned about the volatility historically associated with this form of investing in the stock market. However, what these people don't recognize is that volatility, of course, is a natural component of the stock market. Volatility should not be feared because it is the price that is paid for the promise of long-term positive returns. And to the latter point that I spoke about a moment ago, point B, a significant number of people perform poorly as investors because they become too heavily influenced by the erratic behavior of Mr. Market on a day-to-day basis or even on a week-to-week basis instead of adhering to a sound set of investment principles, such as investing for a long period of time and switching off market noise. Psychology plays a profound, underappreciated role in the success of investors. Hence, for creating Mr. Market, such a pertinent parable for the world of investing, Benjamin Graham is undeniably deserving of a place in the Sloth Investor Dictionary. Jay, what are your thoughts on Benjamin Graham's parable of Mr. Market?
Well, I can't help but think, for the longest time, I think about the Canadian stock market, the Canadian housing market, and it has done nothing but skyrocket higher. And I've been waiting for the perfect time to get in. I've been waiting for a correction to get in with a property back in Canada, and it just hasn't transpired. And ironically, I'm reading some news articles now that with interest rates going higher, people are having buyer's regret, buyer's remorse. And I guess the one thing I've taken from this is trying not to time the market, but also we would do well. People who try and project what's going to happen, how your wealth will increase in the short term, they would do well to have some humility.
Yes.
And this comes with nobody knows. They're going to be 50% chance they're going to be right. It's going to go up. It's going to go up. Okay, there's a 50% chance you're right. Well, it's going to go down. It's going to go down. 50% chance you're going to be right. Nobody knows. Have some humility. But what we do know, based on market history, another H word, is that things go over or go up in the long term if you're in a well-diversified ETF.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I love that those terms, history, humility, fit in really nice and aptly into our focus A, E to I. So yeah, humility is so key. And obviously, I've got my 5 bedrock principles and H represents headstrong. But if I had to kind of form an alternative 5 principles, an alternative SLOTH, then for H, I probably would choose humility. It's so critically important for investors to recognize that we don't have crystal balls. We don't know the geopolitical movements over a month, a year, a decade. So just,
and anyone who tells you they know is wrong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Who knows?
Been people plenty smarter than me who have said this is going to happen and they were wrong.
Indeed. Humility is key. Okay, Jay, so we're coming towards the end of today's episode, but I would like to explore a couple more words that feature in a Sloth Investor Dictionary. So someone was speaking to me a few weeks ago about episode 8 of the Sloth Investor podcast, which was an Olympic-themed special in which we formed analogies between a world of sport and the realm of investing. Naturally, at the Olympics, people, of course, have a home bias. I would expect you to be cheering on Team Canada.
Go Canada!
And I would be cheering on Team GB. However, within the realm of investing, it's not necessarily a good idea to have a home bias. Jay, would you like to explain why?
Well, one of the analogies that come to my mind, I have a cousin who works for a mega cap, and he gets paid by the mega cap and this mega cap company, and he gets stock options in the mega cap company. And if he invests his disposable investable income in the mega cap company and something goes wrong, then he's in a lot of trouble because he's not well diversified. And it's almost the same thing if you're betting on one country.
Yeah.
You want to be in a well diversified portfolio. Now, for the listeners out there, I'm a Canadian, and as you alluded to with my cheering for Team Canada, I invest in Canada in part in a ETF one. There's one called VCN, but it's matched by another one called HXCN. And HXCN was recommended by Andrew Hellam for Canadian investors. And what this does is it invests in the Canadian stock market, but the top end of this ETF is banks. And the banks, traditionally in Canada, pay a very handsome dividend. Well, I take that dividend, and HXCN takes that dividend and reinvests it back in the stock. So I'm not so worried about getting that dividend. But what I have taken steps to do, and I invest a great ETF called VWRL, but you just put me on today, before today's podcast, onto VWRP, which seems very much like HXCN, where it takes the dividend, if I understand correctly, and it puts it back into the stock.
Accumulating fund. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
I love it. I love it. So that's what I love about the VWR fund is that it's a whole broad. It's a measured ETF, whereas the U.S. is 55% of the portfolio. Great Britain is 4%, something like that. So that's what I love about it.
It's great. I mean, it really is. And it's so critically important that we don't get swayed by market commentators saying, "Hey, country X, the country to invest in, it's a hot country this year." And it can be tempting to read into those headlines and think, these are the market experts. They've got our best interest in mind. But again, how do we know whether country X or country Y, country C is going to be the best country moving forward? So again, at this point, I think it's important to refer back to episode 3 of the podcast, which focused on my third bedrock principle of owning the world. Okay, and within that episode, we also referred to home bias. Here's a great quote that I used then, and that it's worth reminding ourselves about again. It comes from Lars Kroyer, the author of the book Investing Demystified, which I'm a big fan of. Begin quote. By expanding the portfolio beyond the home market, we achieve much greater diversification in our investments. This is because we spread our investments over a larger number of stocks, but more importantly, because those stocks are based in different geographical areas and local economies, end quote. Okay, E, F, G, H, that leaves us with the letter I. Jay, let's bring this episode to a close by exploring a cognitive bias.
I want to hear it, what the letter I is.
There are many forms of cognitive bias, but I would like to conclude today's episode by discussing in-group bias. Okay, so listeners, for those who are unfamiliar with the term, in-group bias refers to the tendency for individuals to favorably treat members of their own group compared to other groups. Okay, so how does this specific bias relate to investing? Well, let me explain with an example from my own life. As a young man, my view of the stock market was framed by two leading influences, the media and my family. On those occasions when the stock market was mentioned on television or newspapers, it was invariably because of volatility or a sharp decline. Unfortunately for me, as an 18-year-old, I was yet to learn about the media's bias towards negativity. In addition to this, coming from a family that never invested and that warned me off the supposed dangers of investing, my mind was quickly, although wrongly, made up. I was quick to decide that the stock market was definitely not for me. No one in my family had ever invested, and so I falsely concluded that it couldn't be the right course of action to take with my money. Little did I know how wrong I was. A key reason then, which explains my premature, naive decision to never invest, was the influence of my family. Their negative view of the stock market affected my own view, meaning that I had allowed in-group bias to influence my perception of investing. Whether it relates to investing or not, I urge listeners to consider whether they have ever allowed the groups that they are a part of to act as an echo chamber, thereby potentially causing them to take the wrong course of action. What do you do when you're confronted with a course of action or a perspective that conflicts with your pre-existing views? Do you possess the humility to critique your prior perspective, or do you take a mental shortcut and simply refuse to consider whether there may be some validity to an alternative viewpoint or course of action? Jay, What are your thoughts on in-group bias?
Well, probably one of the biggest things that come to mind when you say that is the idea of WhatsApp groups, investment groups, and some people saying you need to go to this market right now. Commodities are the place to go. Everyone needs to park their money in commodities, and then that sort of starts steering your thinking and your bias towards commodities. But it's not about what's going to happen. I have to remind myself, it's not going to be what's happening in the next 6 months. I've got to be taking a longer term view. Where do I want to be in the next 5, 6, 10 years rather than the 5, 6, 10 months?
Sure. You know, and Jay, you and I were educators, and I just think going back to the first word we discussed today in terms of education, I think one of the key objectives for me as an educator is to expose students to a variety of perspectives. I want to furnish their mind with a variety of perspectives so that they can make up their own mind, synthesize, form their own understandings is critically key, okay? And in-group bias can cause problems in that respect. But yes, so important to consider a variety of perspectives for sure.
And, you know, I have to say credit to my friend Steve. There's a particular market that he's not fond of.
Sure.
But he sent a positive article the other day because it was contrary to his view.
I like that.
But he still shared the article with us because he's like, for anybody who's interested in this market, but I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm averse to this market, but here's a contrarian view to my point of view.
Love that. Love that. The open-mindedness, the ability to consider various perspectives is crucially key. I love that. So, Jay, I think that just about brings today's episode to close. Okay, so before we go, though, I couldn't resist making a few honorable mentions. Of course, how could we not mention fees? However, we devoted an entire episode to the importance of paying low fees, the second bedrock principle of the Sloth Investor, of course, and that is episode 2 of the podcast. Also, moving on to letter H, there's headstrong, the 5th bedrock principle of the Sloth Investor. Again, Jay and I devoted an entire episode to the importance of being headstrong, and that's episode 5 of the podcast. Sticking with H, a key influence on the way that Jay and I invest is, of course, Hallam, Andrew Hallam, the Canadian author of books such as Millionaire Teacher and Millionaire Expert, and Jay touched upon him earlier on as well.
Go Canada.
Yep. And finally, if we circle back to the letter E, Jay and I have spoken about the importance of spending money on experiences, as there is clear evidence that this can do wonders for our overall happiness. In episode 13 of the podcast, entitled To Have or To Do, that is the question, we discuss this a great deal. Okay, so that brings episode 22 to a close. Jay, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, financial literacy, see? I want to say that it's not just for high school students and just for adults, see? Financial literacy, it's for kids in elementary, too.
Jay, on those thoughts, I'm going to go home and watch Rear Window tonight. Maybe even Vertigo. I'm going to do it.
I'm glad I've inspired you.
Thank you very much, Jay. Appreciate it.
All right, everyone, have a good one. We'll talk to you next time.
So long, guys. Bye for now.
For more tips, follow the Sloth Investor on Twitter at @Sloth_Investor.